Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session or panel on teacher education faculty perspectives on technology infusion. I'm Dr. John Clausen from Ball State University. Joining me on the panel is Dr. David Rutledge from New Mexico State University, Dr. Arlene Borthwick from National Louis University, Dr. Teresa Folger from Arizona State University, Dr. Kirsten Green from State University of New York at New Paltz, Dr. Natalie Millman from George Washington University, and Dr. Guy Trainin from the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Our session today is going to be broken up into different segments and then a discussion a little bit at the end, kind of setting the stage for hopefully the discussion that will take place later in our session. To begin the session, the point of our study, looking at this Q methodology study, looking at how teacher education faculty and their perspectives toward technology infusion at their institutions came about through an initial strand at the National Technology Leadership Summit. Dr. Folger and I ran that strand and was focused on program deep and program wide versus technology in a shrinking educational economy. And our focus brought together leaders who are journal editors and leaders in the fields of educational technology to really examine this challenge that was issued by the Department of Education for preparing 21st century teachers. And some of the discussions that came out of that two-day strand had to do with kind of questions related to the work that's been over really now 25 years of development of standards, competencies, different frameworks and models to help teacher education programs prepare candidates to teach with technology and to embed technology within our instructional practices. But the question kind of remains as to why does this challenge persist with all these frameworks and models and standards that are out there? And so some of the conversations out of this working group came to really focus on, well, what about teacher education faculty, and what are their perspectives, or what would they want us as educational technology specialists to know about technology infusion within teacher education? And so our this working group that emerged out of the NTLS strand decided to focus on really four questions, and again, a focus on teacher education faculty who were not educational technology specialists. And they focused around three areas, but there are four questions. The first had to do with how aware are teacher educators of how educational technology can influence learning? How confident are faculty in preparing candidates to use educational technology? The second major area had to do with the design of teacher education programs, and their research question there focused on in what ways do programs assure adequate teacher preparation in the use of educational technology to enhance P-12 learning. And then the third major area focused on leadership and support for technology infusion within programs. And so the fourth research question had to do in what ways does leadership prioritize and support educational technology resources, professional development, incentives for faculty and for candidate development. The approach that came out, again, from the NTLS discussions of this strand focused on using, instead of a Likert scale kind of survey, was to focus on Q methodology and use Q method as an approach. And Q method allows researchers to get at different perspectives of the participants and doing what's called a forced sort of information. And so what we came up with was a concourse of 44 statements that were centered around the standards, competencies for faculty technology use, looking at different models and frameworks in terms of leadership as well. And this concourse of 44 statements So when we did the Q sort with the participants, they were forced to use all 44 statements and use the scale of -3 to a +3 to think what are the statements that are most like me, my program or my practices, or the ones that, and what statements are the least like or most unlike me, my practices or my program. And then the participants kind of rank ordered the different statements along the scale, as you can see in the slide. Okay. So our participants ended up being 31 teacher education faculty who were not educational technology faculty. There was a range of grade level from LED faculty to early childhood to secondary ed content areas, but also a variety of content areas were involved. They included 6 public and private universities from 6 different states across the United States. And participants from a single institution ranged from 2 participants to 10 participants. The results of the Q methodology is that we end up doing a factor analysis with the data that is received. And we end up having 3 factors. The first factor were confident believers. Now these were participants, 30 of the 31 participants loaded on each of these different factors. The confident believers were faculty members who felt strong beliefs about their own ability to use technology with their students and to model it. They also felt like their context supported their use of technology. Factor 2, we labeled it as disillusioned. And for these participants, the disillusioned, they did not feel as confident using technology and modeling it with their students. They felt as though the programs themselves, it was kind of a hit or miss use of technology depending on the faculty who used or the faculty that candidates had, and that there was a lack of support from upper administration and leadership in using technology throughout the teacher ed program. Factor 3, these participants who loaded on factor 3 were tentative about whether or not technology supported learning as well, but they were also, some of them were receptive to the idea that it could be helpful, but they felt tentative in their own knowledge and practice to be able to model technology use for their students in the teacher ed program. Now, for the factor analysis, this for all the 3 factors, all the participants that loaded on them were from different institutions, and so it wasn't that all the participants from one particular institution loaded on any one factor. It was just the opposite. Participants loaded across all 3 factors, and they were across all 6 institutions and how they loaded. Some of the really interesting part of this had to do with the 3 factors that came out of the factor analysis, but in the analysis using Q method, software, and other methodological analysis that we did, there were 6 consensus statements. Now the consensus statements were across all participants, and so these statements again were across programs, across participants, but they were common across all of the participants. And so we had 6 different consensus statements. The first one really focused on a belief about technology used to support learning, that there was a general belief that technology could support student learning, but the insights related to the next 5 statements were ones that gave us concern. And so there were some troubling insights that we got from this. And this gave us the idea for this panel to include our partners here to discuss some of these different issues. And these insights, again, were across all participants. And so the 5 consensus statements that we thought were troubling was that for example, in our clinical practice, cooperating teachers didn't support candidate technology use. That there was a disconnect between the tools used in clinical practice and the ones used in the educator preparation programs. Candidates themselves didn't really engage in an iterative planning and practice with technology. Oftentimes it was a single line in a rubric is what faculty talked about, was that it was whether they used it or not. It was kind of a yes or no answer instead of an opportunity for candidates to practice using technology, make mistakes with it, and continue to modify their practices. Also, the teacher ed faculty were unaware of standards and frameworks and how they were used or utilized throughout the educator preparation program as well. And that across all the different programs, there was little or no assessment structure in place. As I mentioned, there was discussion of a single line on a rubric, but there was not a consolidated effort for assessment related to technology integration and infusion within instructional practices or within the teacher education program. So our recommendations from the Q-sort and analysis is that there's a real need for teacher education faculty, programs, and leadership to really systematically address the design of their programs to meet this challenge. That even though we have frameworks and standards and competencies, it requires teacher education programs to really look holistically at what they're doing and how they can meet these different areas. So for example, the faculty express varying levels of confidence. So what ways can professional development help bring everyone to a similar level? There was little evidence of consistency or coordination between coursework and clinical practice. And then there was really a hands-off approach by leadership, that it was pretty much if one faculty member did something, that was great, but there was not a lot of work on the level of leadership to make sure that integration and infusion was happening. So there's a real need for a program deep and program wide design for preparation programs in the program curriculum. So this is kind of the segue here to our next presenter. I believe it's Kirsten, and she should be next.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about professional development today. So I was able to conduct the Q-sort study with the team of researchers on this panel and was really intrigued by the discussion that arose around doing the activity with my colleagues. I was especially intrigued by comments made about professional development, or rather lack thereof. And at this very moment in time, as the coronavirus forces institutions of higher education to move instruction online, it's impossible to not see the necessity for PD, for technology integration and infusion for faculty, and particularly in the preparation of future teachers. This portion of the presentation shares perspectives on technology integration, and more specifically shares the successes and failures of EdTech for Teacher Prep, a professional development initiative that was intended for teacher education faculty members at SUNY New Paltz, but ended up attracting more pre and in-service teachers than professors. The Q-sort study provided the impetus to further explore the successes and failures of EdTech for Teacher Prep. And on these slides, you just saw a couple of local news stories that were written up about some of the things that we did over the course of the last couple of years. So in order to capture the full picture of how EdTech for Teacher Prep unfolded at SUNY New Paltz, we have to start at the beginning. And our story started a little bit more than 5 years ago. In 2014, the Smart Schools Bond Act was voted into policy in New York State and initiated funding for technology in K-12. We then had a series of campus and state education department sponsored P20 gatherings, which we called summits, to connect K-12 and teacher preparation programs in the region. In 2008, I was able to secure some additional funding for a professional development initiative for our School of Education called EdTech for Teacher Prep, or ET for TP for short. It involved funding a series of workshops in spring and fall 2019 for travel to ISTE 2019 and NICEGate, our state affiliate, for ISTE certification for a small team of faculty and pre-service educators, and it also led to the development of a new course, EED 393, Introduction to Teaching with Digital Tools. We hope to move on to initiating a pilot virtual fieldwork experience this spring, but we're unable to secure funding. And then COVID-19 happened, so things have been interesting to say the least. Our primary approach to professional development through ET for TP was multi-pronged and was meant to offer a sort of a la carte menu of professional development options to both faculty and pre and in-service teacher candidates. We provided opportunities to engage in larger professional development gatherings, such as conferences. We offered on-demand drop-in sessions with members of our team, which at any given time has been composed of 2 or 3 teacher candidates and 1 faculty member. We also provided a series of weekly workshops in spring 2019 and monthly workshops in fall 2019. And finally, we built out a website with tons of online tutorials on anything from adding comments in Google Docs to splitting the audio from a video clip in iMovie. So I'd like to speak briefly about the successes and failures of each of these prongs, if you will, as we learned quite a bit along the way about what worked, what didn't, and what provided unexpected opportunities to learn. And just to be clear, by failures, I really mean opportunities to learn. Nothing about this experience was truly a failure. All of it taught us something new about our institution and what faculty and teacher candidates really need when it comes to technology integration. So since 2014, we've held 3 successful P20 conferences at SUNY New Paltz, which saw 50, 150, and 200 attendees respectively. We created multiple opportunities to break down the silos that exist between K-12 and higher ed. We hosted an early on ISTE certification course on site and made it possible for 7 pre-service teacher candidates to attend ISTE and NICEGate. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, only 3 teacher education faculty members actually attended any of the conferences, and the disconnect between our local school districts and our School of Education remains similar as it was before these efforts. Further, because of the lack of institutional support, we lack funding to continue the programming and travel. Regarding the on-demand drop-in support sessions that we held, we engaged 16 different faculty members and 10 teacher candidates. We offered sessions both face-to-face and virtually, and we believe we moved the needle on a culture of co-learning for education technology, demonstrating the need for students, teachers, candidates, and faculty to learn with and from each other. We also exposed the ongoing need for on-site instructional design or instructional designers or coaches for the School of Education, both faculty and students. Unfortunately, we had a hard time hitting our stride with scheduling. Everyone seemed to have different openings in their schedules, which made it hard to connect at times. People seemed to gravitate more toward the workshops than drop-in sessions. And again, the lack of institutional support made it difficult to sustain the effort. Regarding the workshop and cafe series, we held 15 workshops and 6 EdTech cafes from January through December of last year. Topics were really well received and attendance was consistent. We saw a lot of the same people across the workshops. We provided participation certificates, which were a hit. And I was able to rework the workshop series into a new education technology course. Unfortunately, faculty attendance was much lower than pre and in-service teacher candidates. We also thought that our workshops, which we intended to be concrete and specific, were a little bit too short at 45 minutes apiece. And we determined that somewhere between 6 and 15 workshops per semester would be best. 15 felt like too many and 6 wasn't quite enough. And once again, there was very little incentive provided by the institution to engage in these activities. We also thought that our workshops would have been ever so slightly more dynamic had we had a wireless keyboard for our presentation center in our Center for Innovation. And finally, I'd like to speak to the successes and failures of our website, which includes tutorials for Google Suite for Education, iMovie, WordPress, and digital formative assessment tools. We had 991 discrete views between January and June of 2019, the first 6 months after the launch of ET for TP, which is an average of 165 views per month, which is more than double the amount of views that the website received prior to launching this professional development initiative. Over time, we found it was difficult to maintain with such a small team because information changes so quickly. And we also found that despite the inroads we made with pre and in-service teachers, professional development efforts with faculty remained inconsistent and were subsumed by faculty-wide instructional technology efforts from the campus on the whole, which largely focused only on content delivery and not so much on TPAC. So we have many recommendations for technology infusion based on this experience, and we've whittled them down to the following 4 based on professional development. Number 1, create instructional design or coach positions that are permanent. It's 100% clear that teacher preparation faculty require additional support for technology infusion, not only for faculty, but also for candidates. Number 2, build a guiding framework for technology integration based on what already exists. One thing that we have no lack of in teacher preparation is assessment and evaluation frameworks. So put them to good use in the service of tech infusion whenever possible. Number 3, encourage visionary leadership. Schools and colleges of education need leaders who will provide time and resources for faculty and teacher candidates to infuse technology in teaching and learning. And number 4, keep asking why. We don't yet know the long-term health effects of screen exposure. We don't yet know what the long-term effects of e-waste might be for our planet. We have a lot more to figure out and find out as we explore the possibilities for technology integration in teacher prep. As we've seen in the last month, the teacher matters, and so does professional development. Because of the conferences, workshops, and other EdTech gatherings we've been exposed to through ET for TP, we were quickly able to assemble a technical support team to assist teacher educators with a shift to distance learning in the last month. Within 48 hours of our campus shutting down, we were able to design a plan to bring our capstone clinical experience in our literacy master's program to a fully online environment. This would not have been possible had we not already started the conversation about professional development for technology infusion at SUNY New Paltz. Thanks so much for having this conversation with me today.
Well, thank you, Kirsten. A lot of great stuff, and that last slide in particular of talking about the building the relationships between the faculty and the mentors and coaches will hit home for a lot of people. Our next presenter, I believe, is Guy, training from the University of Nebraska.
All right, I successfully unmuted myself, I think. All right, so I'm talking about the project that has been going on at the University of Nebraska for quite a while. I wanted to thank my collaborators, my original collaborators, Dr. Larry Friedrich and Qizhen Deng, both of which helped write some of this up and make things happen. And I also want to acknowledge Dr. Amanda Thomas, who has done some of the work or continued some of the work as I have moved on into administration. For the work we've done goes back about 9 years to 2011, when we realized that we need to move because the K-12 environment around us was starting to look at one-to-one integration of technologies. They were making first steps, but it was clear that we have to do something with them, and that if we want change on the ground, we have to make sure that we're moving with the districts we're working with. And we have one major districts around us in Lincoln Public Schools, but there are smaller districts that we work with as well. So when we looked at the Q study, which we participated in, we noticed some of the things, some of the challenges, and we wanted to think about how do we respond to these challenges, the disconnect with the cooperating teachers who are doing other things or not doing much at all, the disconnect between the program and the technologies being used in the field. And that's always a challenge because we're spreading our students across Nebraska and even beyond Nebraska, which means that they are going to see different technologies and we can't include them all. And of course, the challenges of iterative planning and lack of assessment that seems to always be there. this is our conception. So we started with TPAC, and that was a part of our guiding thinking. But as we went along, we added to it the view of a triad. So we've got the instructors at the university who are teaching methods. We've got the cooperating teachers who's receiving our students and showing them how things are done where they are at. And then we've got the field supervisor. And the field supervisor became clearly one of the opportunity points, because they get to experience all of the aspects, and they get to have these conversations that we are not always able to have with each specific teacher. So we have conversations at the higher level, at the level of a district, but we don't necessarily have conversation at the lower level with a specific teacher and her practices. So this is the person that can do this, but they can do this only if they are aware of what we're trying to achieve in technology. So this will have some animation, so you'll need to click a little bit, John. But this is an overview of how we went about implementing. So the first phase was to just start planning and start collecting data. So we started with assessments early, and our assessments included an assessment of self-efficacy around using TPAC in different domains, and parallel to that, just frequency in use and examples of best use. And as you'll see later, additional components. The second one was a series very similar to the previous conversation. We had a series of conferences. We've had 18 so far. Some of those were supported by external funds. Some of those were just done with whatever funds were available around us. But we had 18 conferences for the pre-service and in-service teachers. And we've had, again, from 60 to 360 teachers at those. We've started tech pilots in specific classes, and we started faculty training. Again, just to reiterate, probably the hardest thing is to get faculty to actually come and participate and be fully engaged. Next one. Our biggest pilot was trying to implement it in a reading center we have on campus. What specific technologies to support literacy in a one-to-one environment. Very, very successful. Started convincing other faculty that this is worth doing. And then we redesigned our technology integration class, which is still happening. And we actually split it into two separate classes. One of them was happening during the early time in the program, and the second piece was happening a little bit later. So we spread that knowledge around and providing support in more than one point, as sometimes happens. The next step was a device requirement. We call it an iPad requirement. It's actually not specifically iPad, but any kind of a mobile technology that isn't a phone. So it can be any tablet. It can even, and has developed into other devices as well, depending on what districts are using, to just make sure, again, that we're bridging that difference. We created the tech integration practicum. So we've added to one of our field experiences demand for technology integration to make sure that kids get to practice. And also that pre-service teachers have a reason to practice. So it's an expectation, and then their teachers are much more likely to allow it, even if they themselves don't use as much technology. We've added, going back to the idea of assessment, we've added to all of our implementation points, but especially student teaching, an assessment of the use of technology. And eventually in the last 2 weeks, in the last 2 semesters, with our last 2 cohorts, we've added what is called STEM block, where we integrate science, technology, and math all together in one comprehensive semester that also has a comprehensive shared syllabus or series of syllabi, and that tries to put the technology in play with very specific implementation, in this case for science and math, but it later develops into literacy as well. And that is where we are right now. So it's been a long path of change, And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Let's go to the next one. Just so you know, this is just impact on TPAC, and that's really important. We found in our data, and some of this was published, some of it is new. We just keep on adding data to our database. At the start, just the idea of focus, saying to faculty, saying to students, saying to our supervisors and to our teachers, this is important. We're measuring this, we're interested in this, created a big jump in self-efficacy because everybody's paying attention. And then it's two other points. One is when we included the practicum and literacy, what we saw is a small but significant increase in the in TPAC for literacy. And when we did the later integration in math and science, we saw that their TPAC to integrate STEM with technology, which is almost circular, but using technology to support learning in math and science brought that number up as well. This is just an example of what students reported on and teachers reported on what were some exemplary models of technology integration. And there's obviously different levels of detail, but they were trying to pay attention. And this was really important. Often TPAC is collected on a Likert scale, which is helpful to a degree, but is always suspect because we always think about, okay, you think this is really good, but is it really excellent integration? So that self-evaluation or even evaluation of somebody else has a problem if the rubric is not tied to actual actions. And the problem that we have in technology, especially working over 9 years, is that the relevant technologies are actually changing and the expectations are changing because we've got Wi-Fi, broadband in schools in a way we did not 8 years ago. So all kids can be online at once, where that was not even plausible 6 or 7 years ago. So these are changing, and so we're collecting also descriptions of what does excellent practice in their mind mean. So what is it when you put a 4 or 5 out of 5? What does it look like? And so those are these examples, and we're finding more and more. All right. This is our analysis, and I'm just to think about, we were trying to see what matters. So if we looked at the level of analysis and we looked at self-efficacy for technology integration or for TPAC and the frequency of technology integration, what seems to matter? In the regression analysis, it was very clear that program modeling, so the teacher education program or the teacher in the field modeling technology integration was a significant contributor to whether our students felt confident about using technology and actually used it more. And that's why we use the frequency of technology integration as an important variable. Technological knowledge seemed to matter less for self-efficacy, which was a little bit unexpected, but was definitely important in predicting the frequency of technology integration. So both aspects were important. All right. And so recommendation for a clinical practice. A few things that we've learned along the way. One was coordinate with the field placement. Working with the districts around us was powerful. It helped move them and move the university professors and our supervisors ahead, especially in the last few years when the districts around us has moved to one-to-one integration. That caused a major shift because supervisors are no longer able to ignore the technology. It's in everybody's hand all the time. Teachers have to use it, and it's become an expectation. Now with COVID-19, it's even more clear because my kids are doing remote learning from home as well. And so this is really everywhere. Coordinating with field placement is critical. We went to them early, actually in the planning phase, and said, what are you thinking? Let's meet on a regular basis. Tell us what you're doing, what are the steps you're taking so we can march with you, learn from you. So this is not just us teaching everybody. Those conferences really did happen originally with our organization, but very quickly we shifted to a lot of the practicing teachers who are excellent users as the presenters. And on top of that, at this point, it goes both ways. So we're doing training and the district joins, but also the district is doing training, and our supervisors and our pre-service teachers and some of our faculty join those as well to see what's happening in the field. So this is reciprocal relationship, and this is part of the way we're funding it. And that is, we're just joining to whatever the other partners are doing in productive ways. We have to be flexible. So we started with thinking about an iPad requirement, and that worked for a while, but now some schools have Chromebooks, some schools have no Google whatsoever. And so we have to be flexible with our students and be flexible to where they're placed and what the device or the technology or the what is being allowed, and remain on our side flexible enough that we're not teaching specific technologies, but more groups of technologies, and then letting it play out based on what's available in the field. Opportunities for field placements are important. Bringing field supervisors was a major task. They participated in a lot of the professional development, at least in our university, and I know it's not uncommon. These are many retired teachers, and so they have been in the teaching profession for a long time, but not necessarily been using technology avidly. And so bringing them along was really, really important. And keep iterating. You saw that figure where we kept adding components. It's not everything at once. In that program deep and program wide, you have to keep adding components as technologies and expectations change and as the capacity grows. We've moved from relying on TPAC to TPAC with that envelope of the idea of the triad or triarchic relationship between all the players. We added the ISTE standards and eventually the TETSIs, which Dr. Amanda Thomas just wrote about recently in a chapter. So we're adding these components, we're weaving them in as we get along, and that's a way to keep that category of the careful but embracing instructors, keep coming back for more, keep seeing the change, and keep adding component without all it showing up at once. So that's what we've learned.
Well, thank you, Guy.
All right.
Again, the connection between clinical practice and this idea of program deep and program wide, and bringing, like you said, bringing in the field supervisors as well as the cooperating teachers is super important. Our next speaker is going to be Teresa Folger, and she's going to be talking about, again, advancing opportunities for teacher candidates within their teacher ed programs.
Hi, thanks for having me. This is exciting to be online doing all this, making use of the technology. I work at Arizona State University, and my story is that 10 years ago, we decided to eliminate our standalone educational technology course. Some of you have heard this story before. And we decided to go with a model that initially was to, quote unquote, infuse technology into our 4 methods courses in each program. Since then, we've moved toward a fully infused program where every course in our program addresses technology integration. So before I continue, I want to thank the colleagues at Arizona State University that have been with me on this research and innovation journey. Dr. Ray Buss, Dr. Keith Wetzel, who is emeritus now retired, we miss him. Leanne, Lindsay, Stacy Pasquale, and Jody Donner, who also were professional developers in this journey and helped in the research process. Before I move into what I want to say, I want to give a definition check because I think it's important to have some terminology to help us discuss this whole idea of a program-wide and program-deep effort to address technology in our certification programs. At ASU, we're talking about technology integration as a moment in time, an event, an experience where learning uses technology as a leverage, right? We're integrating technology right now into our site presentation. Thank goodness we can still do this, right? We're also integrating Google presentations, and a couple of us have the article. I have the article, the QSort article open, so I can kind of reference back and forth. All those are integrated into this experience. Infusion is quite different, and infusion for us means that we have a curriculum that spans the breadth of our certification program. So that curriculum in this diagram on this slide is that gray line that's slanted upward, and that slant represents the the spiraling type effect, where students become more independent and more efficient and effective with the use of technology in their teaching. The ST represents student teaching in a program where technology is in abundance. So one of the statements in the QSort study was this statement on this slide: my teacher education program has coursework that requires teacher candidates to engage in iterative practice for integrating technology in teaching and learning. And I want to talk to that today from three different angles, and sort of a conversation about this being a paradigm shift for our field. I want to talk about the siloed effect of integrating technology in small pockets. I want to talk about the iterations that are needed, and about the long-term project that this is. So first, let's look at this siloed effect. So at ASU, the diagram on the far left was me about 12 years ago when I taught the educational technology course. And that line, the curriculum line, spiked in that course, right? And then it dropped off because nobody else took that charge beyond the course that I taught. When we moved initially towards a technology infusion effort, we quote unquote infused technology in the methods courses, the pink dots in the middle diagram, but the other courses remained virtually untouched, at least to the capacity that someone from the vision of all of us participating here today would experience. And the red dot represents the experts on educational technology on the sideline, kind of feeding the system. So our progression now has been, again, long-term, but the ultimate vision is that all of these courses and all of the experiences would leverage technology. So we're looking at three aspects: curriculum, the gray line moving upwards; models, which we think are critical, that we are all models, that all teacher educators are models of good use of technology, but that also we're providing our teacher candidates with appropriate K-12 models. So that references back to where do we place them in student teaching, and how does this iterative practice of teaching with technology, how can that be of a more intentional part of our programs? Okay, the next paradigm shift I want to talk about is the change process of this. And as I explained earlier, this literally has been a 10-year ongoing, with a lot of effort, process for us at ASU. And we're not there yet. And quite honestly, I feel very strong in terms of job security. It is an ongoing change process for a couple of reasons. One is the technology is constantly changing. Look at what just happened this week, right? We don't know what's going to happen to K-12 after this experience with the coronavirus. There is a huge receptiveness and barriers that have been broken overnight to technology use in K-12 environments. And I think it's going to change how we need to prepare teacher candidates. Not only for just teaching with technology, but for teaching online. I've already had a couple of charter schools reach out to me telling me that they want to put an online school in place. Super exciting this time. So, this whole change process is not like an overnight adoption of technology infusion. We cannot see it that way, or we're going to fail our systems, and bigger than that, we're going to fail our students. We have to see this as an ongoing change process that's small. It's like Keith Wetzel says, it's like steering an ocean liner versus driving in a speedboat. This is an ocean liner. And if we turn the steering wheel too fast, we're going to lose some passengers. We have to have everybody with us on this one because it is a systems change process. Next slide.
Did I skip a slide? Sorry.
I think you did, but that's okay. They don't have to be in order. Iterations. So I'll go back to this. Student teaching. Student teaching is the old paradigm, right? Where we prepare students for this performance that they're going to have opportunity to practice their student teaching. In the new paradigm, we really are trying our best to have students in the field every semester, doing increasingly, having their responsibilities related to the use of technology grow and develop as they progress through the program. Scaffolds are brought down, but by the time they hit student teaching, they need to be proficient. What we're working on at ASU now is how can we instill the ability of teacher candidates to navigate the ambiguities of uncertain contexts. I don't know about you guys, but student teaching today, the teachers this semester at ASU are teaching online. They had to make a quick shift. We had to make a quick shift. How do we prepare students to be able to handle those kinds of changes in context? Where do they seek support? How do they know where to go? What the equipment access is? What do parents expect? All these contextual factors are very relative to the specific environment in which they're going to teach. And we want to do our best in the upcoming iteration of this practice idea to help students prepare to teach anywhere, in any circumstance, and hold true to their beliefs about teaching with technology. Let's go to the last slide. Yep, this one. So what I want to talk mostly about today to this audience of educational technology specialists is our role. As you saw on that last slide, I don't teach an educational technology course anymore. I'm feeding the system. And so my role is that of a champion. And champions are enlightened, connected, and opportunistic, driven by emotional energy, and have a strong sense of personal purpose. But I'm not in the front lines. And that's difficult. And that is a leadership call and a challenge that requires me to use my research as a way to help us see where we need to make improvements and that we are progressing and where we need to go next, create new visions, but also brokering communications to administrators, to tech support, to field experience, to all these other people to keep the systems growing. And I think, John, you might have some insight there. But the calling is kind of, I make the analogy, I put the tennis shoe here because I feel like moving forward in technology and infusion is sort of like a team sport, in that every single member of that team has to perform to their best capability to win the game. And it doesn't just require the team players on the field to be effective. It requires the coaching system, the parents that bring the sippy juices, whatever we do these days, you know, all of those systems that affect the use of technology in our teaching, in K-12 teaching, and in the transfer of the skills from the university to the field, critical. So I think this is a new line of research, and one that I would like to have some conversations with later, soon, especially after this coronavirus situation kind of passes, what were educational technology faculties, what were our role in helping non-ed tech faculty get on board quickly, be effective in this time of triage, right? I don't see what's happening now as completely effective online learning if they've just moved online quickly. But I'm curious how the role of educational technology faculty has played out through this, and also what we learn and how we want to, what of those practices do we want to keep going forward? How can we champion?
Well, thank you, Teresa. I know again, things are always changing, and as you point out in your dot diagrams there, it's I think each of us can kind of see different programs and where we might be and where we might place ourselves within those levels, and thinking about us as champions and what that entails. Being a team sport is really valuable. Our next speaker is going to be Natalie Millman from George Washington, and she's going to speak about policies.
So one reason why I am talking about policies, I was involved in the study, and as we were looking at the data and kind of reflecting on the findings, it dawned upon me that so much of the findings illuminate not only the complexities of investigating all these varying layers and levels of technological, pedagogical content knowledge, faculty beliefs, their confidence, how they're integrating, how they're preparing pre-service teachers and in-service teachers for that matter. But it also demonstrated for me a persistent and historically established barriers that have existed for years. I have been studying this field since 1996. That's when I started my doc program, so I've been around for a while. And it's just interesting to see that from a macro level perspective, looking at the findings, that a lot of the barriers that existed in the late 80s that were illuminated and demonstrated in various reports then, and also since then, that we're still seeing some of these things. And you would think with the policies and practices that are in place over the years and all of these findings that we might see more technology infusion and integration, and that's not really the case. So next slide, please. So with regards to how, thinking about policies and practices, the findings demonstrated inconsistencies in how technology was integrated, how faculty were prepared, and that's actually a consistent finding that we've seen over the years where you have faculty who are working for many years or a number of years and they are prepared in different places. So there's inconsistency there. But also there was a lot of inconsistency with the expectations that leaders had, or at least that teacher education faculty perceived that their leaders had within their institutions. So it makes me think, what policies and practices should be developed and implemented? Some of the institutions that participated in the study are institutions that do have accreditation standards that they have to follow, but I'm not clear that all of them had to, that all of them were institutions that participated in the accreditation of teacher education. But even so, it still brings to question what policies are in place, what practices are in place, how were these policies developed, how are they implemented, even within one institution, what are the policies and practices that were developed? Next slide, please. So again, thinking on a more macro level perspective, I looked at what the findings were and our discussions about them. And thought, well, there is a need for researching and studying policies that promote technology use and integration. We need to better understand what works and what doesn't work, and also within what contexts. What might work at one institution may not work at a different institution. We should also review existing research about best practices, as well as how to incentivize faculty, and particularly schools and cooperating teachers. And if there's anything that I think that COVID-19 has definitely brought to light, it's issues of access and inequity, as well as infrastructure issues, technology inequity. And there has already been established, if you look at the research and how the role of cooperating teachers and placement of pre-service teachers in their actual like internship, if that's what you call it, or practicum, that there's often a mismatch between what they're being taught and then the ability to actually practice what they're learning, whether it's a particular approach to teaching their content area, or it's integrating technology in a meaningful way. So we need to look at how can we implement better best practices into those situations, but also look at how can we level the playing field better so that there isn't all this inequity. And I think those are really larger macro level, state level kinds of infrastructure and type of policy issues that we need to look at. We also need to develop stronger connections and expectations with cooperating teachers so that pre-service teachers can actually apply what they're learning. And, you know, I've heard of, and this is more anecdotally, but there's also some research to support it, that there might be some pre-service teachers that are in classrooms and they have very limited ability to do much planning. There might be very limited technology in place, or sometimes the technology's there, but the cooperating teacher limits their ability to use the technology. So what can we do in schools of education to better educate cooperating teachers? How can we support them? How can they be incentivized? What kinds of accountability might there be also? You know, a lot of institutions do work with cooperating teachers and provide some kind of compensation. So what can be done to support a more robust learning environment where pre-service teachers are actually able to practice what they're learning and transfer that learning into practice? So another question is, what policies need to be developed that might foster technology use and integration by teacher education faculty as well as cooperating teachers? Clearly there are standards that exist. There are the TETs that exist as well. We can look at those, but one question I have is whether or not there need to be additional policies that need to be thought of. And that also brings to mind the idea of program-wide and program-deep. What policies programmatically, deep and wide, need to be thought about. And we also need to think about how to minimize the barriers that we know exist. I mean, some of them are barriers that deal with teacher education beliefs. Some are actual infrastructure issues. Some are technology issues. So what can we do? We know these barriers exist. These barriers have existed for years. What can we do to better support learning and try to minimize and eliminate those barriers? Oh, sorry, we're already on the next one. You're very fast.
Oh, sorry, we need to go back.
No, we're good, we're good. And then, of course, there's a need to research and study the implementation of policies that promote technology use and integration, which I think we're all involved in this, but really looking at the policies that are being used and which ones work and for whom and under what context. I already mentioned the need to develop program-wide and program-deep curriculum that meaningfully integrates and uses and applies technology.
All right, thank you, Natalie. This issue of policies, and again, I'm hopeful that those attending the session can see these threads that are kind of weaving their way through each of these different presentations. For our next slide, we kind of have it set up as a discussion, but I'm going to invite Arlene and David to make some connections from the different presentations that have been given, and to provide some additional comments.
Okay, so Natalie did a beautiful sort of summary of what she saw in her programs and how it worked, but it seemed to touch in everywhere that we saw in how people express what's happening in their programs. The main thing seemed to be for the teacher candidate ambiguity needs a foundation from many components. That can be from the school districts, from the leadership within the schools of education, to the faculty members. They need some place to go when things get challenging. We want to support our teacher candidates. It seems that in the last 8 to 10 years, ed technology has changed. And I think that's why I started to look at more of these eliminating standalone courses. It seemed like the possibility to integrate it was more plausible. You didn't have to know how to code in HTML to make a web page anymore. So it simplified the process for content teachers to integrate the technology into their courses. And it seems that all of these programs, 2014, 2011, 2010, big shifts were happening in how the technology was integrated. And also what the bandwidth and what was happening in the school districts changed. So the accessibility rose and we could do more with that. And I also think one of the key things that came through is the faculty members we have now have grown up with more technology available to them. So they're going to develop new teacher education approaches with technology integrated. So as we continue to develop and improve our skills, the people that are starting now who may be just entering the field, this is more comfortable for them. Maybe they taught with technology when they were a 5th grade teacher and they went and did their PhD in ed technology for 5th grade. So they come in already thinking about integration as normal. Whereas previous generations of teacher, it was an add-on or something that did kind of stand alone. They checked a box on the rubric saying they used a website, or they taught PowerPoint that day, or they took pictures with the digital camera and let the children make a storyboard with digital pictures. So that stuff is normal now with amongst a lot of our current teachers in the field. That was sort of what I saw coming through from each one of these as kind of a discussant of these themes that emerged across all of these programs. And that aligned really well with what the Q methodology was looking at, was where are there consistencies across the country of the idea of reiterative thinking and planning and organizing of technology for breadth and depth. Gotta make sure I do that right. Okay. Arlene, did you have anything you wanted to add into that?
Sure. I'll just add one closing comment, and that's, of course, that we hope during our live session tomorrow, I believe it is, that we'll hear some more comments from folks. But what came across from the first 3 speakers, Kirsten and Guy and Teresa, was the word long-term. So when you look at each of their presentations, notice that both Guy and Kirsten had kind of a timeline, and then Teresa was showing her timeline in the figures with the various pink and red dots. I mean, this is a long-term thing. I heard the word 10 years over a couple of those presentations. So technology infusion and addressing, as Natalie outlined, all the issues we need, you know, the complexity of all the aspects we need to address, from faculty confidence to cooperating teacher incentives. I mean, there's a whole breadth of issues that we need to address, and it's a long-term effort, and that leadership needs a champion. And we hope that those of you taking a look at the presentation here will serve in that kind of role as well. John?
All right, thanks, Arlene, David. I just wanted to kind of bring it back to these consensus statements that in the study where we found, and you recognize these as discussed throughout each of the presentations, that it's these issues with cooperating teachers and this disconnect between clinical practices and the tools, candidates engaging in that iterative practice, and awareness of these standards and the role of assessment throughout the process really plays important roles. And as we move forward, thinking about program deep and program wide technology infusion, again, appreciate Teresa's defining the differences here between integration and infusion. When we're looking at a program wide, we're talking about it throughout the methods courses, throughout the content area courses, throughout practicum, and throughout their student teaching. And that process does require time, but as she also mentioned, is it's contextualized. And so it's going to look different potentially at each institution, whether that's one that has a required ed tech course that they then modify, as Guy pointed out, to where it's now split between beginning of the program and their end of their program, or if it's something that is there's no ed tech course, but maybe they're using micro-credentialing that have layered badges onto different courses that get at these ISTE standards, for example. And so as we move forward into the, and progress and seek out the champions who might be watching our presentation here, the ones who are presenting, that we want to encourage you to continue this work and to think critically about it. And we'd also like to invite you to our session that is going to be on Friday, April 10th from 2:15 to 2:30 in the virtual room number 4, where David, Arlene, and I will be discussing more about the collaborative research and the process we all went through to conduct this Q study, to understand teacher education faculty's perspectives on technology infusion. And so we want to thank you all for attending the session, for everyone who participated in the session in the panel here today. Really appreciate your work and getting your slides all together. And just want to thank Site also for pre-recording the recording.